actual scenes from Safe, and then I seem to flag that. I can do live transcript, and I'm the only one here. I knew that. Okay, and what else do I have to do? iCloud recording. Okay, I can. I'm going to share screen shortly. I just definitely glanced at the transcript. It makes no sense. Let's see. I just definitely glanced at transcript. Okay. I'm not going to look at that. I don't think it's going to be very useful, but never mind. So, Safe, and it is our fourth melodrama. This is my fourth tape, and we'll have our fourth open class this Monday, 7 to 9. I posted the link on Quirkus. That's our last official meeting before the midterm. I haven't got the dates quite here, but I think you know the drill, especially if you've had me before in Zoom time. I will be posting a long prompt of sorts that will try and set up the issues of melodrama and modernity. I will give you a link to a melodrama that we haven't seen yet, but the prompt will be encouraging you to connect it to scenes in the movies that we have. So roughly speaking, the midterm's going to ask you to show how melodrama is functioning in the new melodrama that we haven't seen, partly by pairing it up with interesting moments in the other melodramas. And we'll continue to kind of push that idea that every melodrama is, just to a degree, it's a unique movie, but it's also participating in generic genre expectations, and it's either fulfilling those expectations or defying those expectations. Safe defies expectations almost throughout. Other melodramas may defy expectations and then provide for them. Safe won't do that either. Just comparing the ending of Safe with the ending of Now Voyager, or even American Beauty, the refusal of transcendence is it's deliberate. It's there by its absence. You could say, well, wait, how is this a melodrama? That final scene in that ceramic igloo couldn't be more different from Charlotte saying, will you help me, Jerry? Will you let me help me protect this narrow thing? And then the camera goes out the window and up into the stars, whereas you have Carol White looking into a mirror saying, I love you. Very different than, Jerry and Charlotte saying, there are people here who love you. And they agree to not consummate this love, either publicly, physically, and so on. But so on the one hand, they seem completely different, but, are they? Because we talked about what has Charlotte really, where is she really? I mean, and not to say there's no hope in Charlotte's portrayal, because the movie's very clear about that. But the first 2/3 of the movie, she's like, well, I'm going to be an old maid. I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to have children. And at the end of the movie, she seems to have a kind of virtual lover and a child. She had with Elliot Livingston, he offered marriage, didn't forbid having a child, but I clearly wasn't that into it. It wasn't even that very physically, didn't seem to have much of an interest in Charlotte physically. He had a lot of interest in her socially, and that's, of course, what the mother also saw as essentially the only thing. But it seemed to bother Charlotte that Elliot saw her as a social fixture, and she she wanted more than that, but and yet and so sort of virtually she achieves that with Jerry. He seems to want her physically. The cigarette smoking is hard to see in a different light than that. But it's not going to happen, and she's not going to have her own child. She's going to have his child, which without will become their child. So there's an awful lot of work in this melodrama to somehow ease Charlotte into a position where she can become her mother without becoming her mother. And then we have to look closely at that. Has she succeeded in not becoming her mother? It would seem she certainly made some progress, but it's kind of startling that the movie ends with Tina coming down the stairs. But the movie began with Charlotte coming down the stairs. The movie ends with Charlotte at the bottom of the stairs. Well, no, I think she's up at the top, encouraging Tina to go down. And now Voyager starts with Mother Vale, seated at the bottom. So there's clear differences. Charlotte is seen as much more nurturing. And yet it's a little disconcerting that Tina's in a perfect party dress. And in fact, I think Charlotte says to go down slowly because of your dress. So there's a hint of constriction. And in fact, Tina gets excited and she bounces down the last steps. And very different than Charlotte's, strange, hesitant, creaking foot going up and down, and my ugly duckling. And Tina's seems to have gone through a makeover of sorts, not an ugly duckling. So there seems every reason to see them as completely different, but they're eerily parallel and symmetrical. And I'm going to be talking today about, I don't know if I can't remember I showed you this before now, but I don't think I said a lot about it. So here's the Venn diagram I'm working with today. Don't forget this phone number. I don't even know whose phone number that is. Don't call it anyway. Symbolic, real, imaginary. We've talked about those before, but I'm going to say a bit more. And relative to the visual, the way that cinema uses the visual to try and translate issues. If it's the case that our reality is the nexus point of the symbolic, the real, and the imaginary, and I'll say something about those three in a moment. What can a movie do to show the shifting relationship of the symbolic, the real, and the imaginary in a given character? Because arguably, of all the genres we're looking at, melodrama seeks transformation the most. It seeks finding the sacred in the secular, not mourning its loss, not thinking you've got it and then being destroyed, which would be more film noir, but actually finding it. And so it has so the way the symbolic, the real, and the imaginary shift from the beginning of a melodrama to the end, in every genre you can think about this way. Melodrama opens with a sort of lockdown on the symbolic, real, and imaginary. Charlotte is trapped. The symbolic is in many ways the entire house. Her room is her imaginary. So inside the house, she's able to find a room that she locks, because she locks the door, where she can imagine. Now, ideology has been defined as by Althusser, the critic, as your imagined relationship to your actual existence. So your actual existence is the real. Then you have your imagined relationship to that real, which is not the same as that real. It's your reality, and it participates in the real. But it's just to a large extent, it's imagined. It doesn't mean you're delusional. It just means that you imagine and you fill in gaps so that your reality seems to be corresponding to the real. Now, the only thing that can move that relationship around is to challenge and alter the symbolic. Charlotte, so the symbolic is things like money and language and the house and the mother. So Charlotte's symbolic world is rigid. It doesn't move. And that's part of why she's trapped in her room forever, carving rigid boxes that contain nothing. She feels like an ornamented box that is not allowed to have. She's not allowed into her own interiority. Carol White isn't either when we talk more about Safe. So a lot of melodrama is a woman whose symbolic order has frozen the relationship of the imaginary and the real, so that she's retreated alarmingly into the imaginary, in a kind of panic and fear of not wanting to face the real. That's one way to read Safe, of course, and that's very disconcerting because, unlike Now Voyager, Carol keeps retreating from seeing the real, and it keeps forcing her into a smaller and smaller room. And she hardly has an imaginary at all, and that's part of the problem. Charlotte at least has a pretty active imaginary, and she keeps these books that her mother doesn't like, and she smokes her cigarettes, and she puts on lipstick when there's nobody in the room. So that's, by now you've seen that Venn diagram. Now I wouldn't want to be held to this, but I had a little fun of like, well, let's say that melodrama trades very heavily in windows, doors, stairs, and mirrors. It's very much a genre about houses, not just houses, but homes. Film noir will be full of hotels, rented rooms in basements or the top of the stairs. There's no home in noir, or if there is a home, it's a base where people are trying to get something else done. There's no family in film noir, whereas melodrama is centered on a house, which is a home, and it's a home because it contains a family unit. But how do each of the people inside this home relate, and what's their role in the mythos of family? So there's a lot about family in that opening of Now Voyager, and Charlotte's been asked to play a role that's essentially soul destroying, to shore up a certain image of family, and Mother Vale's very clear about that. No Vale has ever had a nervous breakdown. And Jackwith, who is like all the mystic roles in melodrama, whether it's Ricky or Cheng Huan, is preparing to fiddle with the symbolic order. That's all Cascade can do, is try and give somebody enough breathing room, take them out of the symbolic order that's pinning them down, take her out of her room, take her out of that house, take her away from her mother, put her at Cascades, and then when she's no longer literally in the presence of the symbolic order, there's much more of an opportunity and a possibility that she will be able to challenge it. And of course, she's terrified of going back into the house, back into the symbolic order. And when she does, we see why. Because going back into a symbolic order that had constructed you in a certain way, there's at least two levels to escaping a rigid symbolic order. One is you get out of the symbolic order that literally surrounds you. And then two, you have to shore up enough of who you are apart from that symbolic order that if you choose to re-enter it, and usually since it involves family, it's hard not to make sure that it doesn't just rearrange you back into what you were before. And I think all of us know that Thanksgiving Day phenomenon, which is coming up, where you can go home. If you go home for 3 or 4 days, many of you may live at home, and it's somewhat different. But if you've been away from home and you go back and you have a meal or two, you really can feel it. And it's a question of are you actually persuaded to go back into your former role as your reality, or an in-between possibility is you pose more or less as the family has always expected you to, but you try and keep a little bit of a distance, like this is just 3 days, and that's okay to a point. And to what degree do you say, that's not the way I experience myself anymore? Because that it's hard for that to be welcomed, because the structure you're in depends on the role you play to support the symbolic order that prevails. When Lester throws the asparagus against the wall, he's essentially saying, there's a family atmosphere has been set up here where nobody sees me anymore, and as a patriarch, as a father, even as an equal partner or an equal parent. And he dramatically reasserts, if not necessarily his patriarchal rights, but the fact that he's there, and that he's not going to play his role of being the loser. The family, both his daughter and father and daughter have, mother and daughter have constructed around him. So what I'm suggesting that's kind of fun, it's almost like a kaleidoscope, is how are, windows, doors, stairs, and mirrors, how do they show up in these melodramas to suggest the tension between the symbolic, the real, and the imaginary, as it pertains typically to a character who's crucial to the symbolic order, but her role is subservient. And what's shocking about Safe in so many ways is that Carol goes from being just sort of socially visible to disappearing. It's melodrama in reverse. Every attempt she makes, and part of the problem, she doesn't make any attempts. The passivity of Carol White is stunning. She doesn't know who she is. At a certain point, she just doesn't know where she is. There's that startling moment where the husband comes in and says, I just got a call from some carpool thing and they'll call back later. And she just says, where am I? And he's like, you're home. Greg and Carol's home. Well, is it Greg and Carol's home? It's really Greg's home. And it's a second marriage for him. His son Rory tolerates Carol at best, and because the father has requested it, but it's clear he doesn't see her as anyone he has to take seriously. And she, Carol has become so adept at performing her role that she is disappearing into it. And then there are virtually no staircases in Safe. That alone makes it a very eerie melodrama. L.A. and the homes in L.A. I mean, it's not like there aren't any stairs, but Todd Hayne seems to have zero interest in stairs as a blocking device. I'd be curious if there's any moments I'm missing that where you guys want to say, well, no, wait, there's that stair scene. Maybe I'm sitting here right now and I honestly can't even call any up. Everything is so flat, and the camera just like Kubrick style, kind of like that Steadicam effect that he got, particularly in The Shining. It's always cruising low over the carpet, and the rooms are vast, and the carpet seems almost like an ocean, and the camera is like a shark. It just kind of glides over the carpet and goes right and goes left and kind of swims into these vast rooms. And the way Haynes repeated, he's almost no close-ups in Safe until that last devastating close-up. It's almost, Haynes knew melodrama really well. I think he's very aware of Now Voyager. Again, I could make the startling case that that Safe is a remake of Now Voyager with all of the melodrama's gears stripped. So everywhere where Carol White is supposed to come forth, and there's no obvious Mother Vale figure. There's one brief conversation with the mother, which is chilling enough, very brief, where the mother seems to have called in order to just say that she's called and then to get off the line, because she's like, oh, I just came in. No, it's fine. Oh, okay. I'm fine. He's fine. They're fine. Everyone's okay. Okay, talk soon. It's like, well, what, weren't you talking now? And she seems to hang up the phone, and she's like, Fulvia, can I have a glass of milk? Milk there's nothing quite like, the camellias in Now Voyager could be compared to the milk. And that would give a real sense of the difference between these two movies, because where the camellias help to shore up Charlotte's kind of stepping increasingly outside of the symbolic order that has kind of imposed a certain relationship of her imaginary to the real that was very imprisoning. Her imaginary, she's less imaginary. It's another way to put it. She's becoming more visible, and now coming down the stairs. Suddenly Livingston sees her. He's seen her many times. He stood her up. He's like, well, we've never met. I've never seen you before. That seems to be what everyone thinks. And then after her transformation, and of course her mother's horrified. It's worse than Lisa led me to expect. I mean, you're fully visible. You're not my creature. So we need to make you invisible again, and tell them your eyebrows will grow back, and put on the dresses you were wearing before. We'll tailor them for now, but the goal would be that you'll have the same figure, I suppose, at some point, and you'll just look like that Charlotte who came down the stairs in the opening shot. So where's the equivalent of Mother Vale in Safe? It isn't just, and this is where Safe, Todd Haynes makes a further comment about melodrama, is that the challenge to the young woman isn't just to get out from under the gaze of the mother. It's the entire culture is a gaze upon Carol, and she doesn't even sweat, and she goes to her aerobics. She does the prescribed jumping around, although we get a second aerobics class where she's at a sink. She can't, she's the performance is breaking down. She's more and more exhausted, and she's very determined to not understand what her lack of developed interiority has to do with her increasing breakdown. We talk about breakdown and breakthrough. We have talked about it. There's only breakdown in Safe. Every attempt to break through is a further breakdown. You could compare Cascade to Wrenwood. Cascade as a place doesn't seem to matter very much. It's Jack with, it's very, the only reason Cascade is important is that it's not her house. Wrenwood has this whole American Western idea that you go west, you go through the desert, you have them driving to find, an untrammeled American land. And that's where you can recover from the excesses of American civilization. Although it's not made specific, Wrenwood no doubt was taken away from one native tribe or another. So it's hardly the fresh place that it poses. The highway's quite close. There's a rather damning 45-second scene that, interestingly, Haynes added after Safe premiered at Redford's Sundance Festival. Haynes was a little unsatisfied, was a little disconcerted that the audiences were trying to hang on to Peter, the head of Wrenwood, as a kind of a Jackwith figure or a Ricky figure or even a Cheng Huan figure, which is fair. That's what he's there for. But Haynes also wants us to see him as ineffective. And so he added just a 45-second scene where Carol's walking with her husband and they just look up at this giant house. And her husband says, well, who lives there? And she says, oh, that's Peter's. And it looks nothing like Wrenwood. It towers over Wrenwood. It's got, it kind of looks like more like Charlotte Vale's house. And so we're given this very, very quick hint that, that just doesn't necessarily mean Peter's this horrible manipulating. He seems pretty caught up in his own thing. I think he believes that what he certainly believes he's trying to help. And I think he further believes that he is helping, although why? We see the suicide of the husband who retreated all the way into that ceramic shell. And we see the very disconcerting dialogue with Nell at one of the group meetings where, he says, so why are you sick? And you have to look at that scene carefully, because he basically goes around the circle and breaks down everybody into saying, I made myself sick. I made myself sick. Now he has AIDS, and he seems to have taken on that he made himself sick, or if he doesn't stop reading newspapers, and then the AIDS will get him. It doesn't really treat it as a virus. I'd be curious what you guys think about this movie now that we're in COVID, and there's anti-vaxxers and there's all this stuff flying around about this virus. I mean, in Safe, it seems to be environmental pollution. Now we literally have a virus that's flying around. But I think, and I think Haynes was concerned that he was surprised, although I'm not really, that one way to try and read Safe as a melodrama is to try and lean on this idea that which is not without merit, that there's a lot of pollution. But I think what we're also invited to see is that Carol increasingly nominates pollution as the sole and only cause of her problem. And then she doesn't have to look at her marriage. She doesn't have to look at her own positioning, her upbringing, which we seem to find nothing about. The scene with the psychiatrist, very brief scene, so it still could be compared with what happens with Jackwith, because on the one hand, that psychiatrist is more credible. That what psychiatrists do is they tend to try and get the patient to talk about what they see as the problem. Jackwith makes it sound awfully inviting and easy. I just put up a signpost, not this way, that way. We see Carol's stunning lack of interiority in the scene with the psychiatrist. First of all, he's sitting behind this vast desk and he's got this massive Asian collage behind him. There's a lot about this Orientalism, bringing in of Asian, a myth of Asian serenity, which you see everywhere now. Meditation, Buddha books, Deepak Chopra, even Oprah, all of these, Dr. Phil, they're kind of very, very commercial Dr. Jackwith in a way. And, but you can't think, he's like, well, so you're married, you have a son. And it's curious, she says, no, he's my husband's son, I'm his stepmother. But Rory always calls her mother in a way that does seem a little imposed, because it didn't really act. It seems kind of like he's been pulled aside by the dad and say, you're gonna call her mother. Just this make this a family. Kind of like Cheng Huan giving Lucy a doll and saying, this is our baby, just same as Jerry and Charlotte. This kind of desperate psychological family that gets made out of thin air. So, okay, windows, doors, stairs, mirrors. Now mirrors, so I'm suggesting that windows are the imaginary. Like, think of Lester when he's inside the window looking out at his wife in the opening scene. And he's like, she didn't always used to be this way. She used to be happy. Typically when people are shown, when the character is shown inside a window, it's them wondering about their imaginary. Like they're inside the room of their imaginary, but there's a window, which means this. And if you'll notice, Charlotte and Jackwith move to the window as this discussion becomes more and more heated. And it's in front of the window that Charlotte will say, my mother says, my mother says, my mother says, and can you help me? So you look around, your imaginary room is supposed to have a window. There's no window in that ceramic hut, which is one of the most chilling things about that ending. And not only do you not have a camera going out a window, where there is no window to go out, there's no window to look out. You can be trapped in your room looking out a window, but that's still a lot different than being trapped in a room with no windows. And if we give that a psychological reading, Carol's foreclosed on alternatives, and the symbolic order is most powerful when it can't even occur to you that there's a different order. It's not that there are different orders and then you're like, well, what am I going to do? That's not the order I have. It's not about, you don't even see it as an order. It's like fish in water. It's like that famous to me joke of there's three fish and two fish are swimming by this other fish, and that other fish says, hey guys, how's the water? And then the two fish keep swimming for a little while, and then one fish turns to the other fish and says, what's water? That's the symbolic order. These fish are in water. They don't know they're in water. They don't know what water is, even though it's literally what they are living in. So typically you don't know the very thing that utterly surrounds you, because it utterly surrounds you. Obviously, if a fish gets pulled out of the water, they're going to figure out what water is pretty fast. Water is the thing I got to get back to, or I'm going to die. And there is a fish out of water tension in a lot of melodrama. Like Charlotte goes to Cascade because she can't just jump entirely out of the water. And Carol, unfortunately, she never seems to all these attempts she gets to help herself, she doesn't ever approach them as, how do I need to change my situation? Like Charlotte's pretty clear. She has no, but it's funny that she has no clue how to do it. Like, I shouldn't go back home. I mean, yeah, I'm better, but I'm only better because I'm at Cascade. And if I go back home, I'm everything, I'll just fall apart again. And Jackwood doesn't disagree, but Charlotte's not quite ready to say, so I'm going to, well, actually, I liked her other, I had to get a job, be, work at a restaurant and live in a little place. It would feel like a palace compared to the constrictions of the symbolic order. Carol, I mean, I'm not saying that everyone needs a job, but Carol needs a purpose. Everyone sort of acts like she has a purpose, but when she's talking to her girlfriend, she says, I'm a little run down. There's a client meeting coming up, and then friend's like, oh yeah, and it's not a big moment, so you might not have thought a lot about it, but it's like, I always assume, in that moment on a first viewing, I was like, oh, she's going to have to, at the very least, she's going to have to be giving the catering people tons of orders. I mean, that massive kitchen, I assumed it was going to be there, and it's in a restaurant. It's not, she didn't do anything for the client meeting except show up, and she couldn't even show up. And not to necessarily blame her. Those guys all seemed like jerks, and I would probably, phase off and start thinking about Kubrick or something, and I would miss the joke, the silly vibrator joke, which is kind of misogynistic and stupid and not particularly funny, although fascinating in terms of modernity. It's fine to have a machine in such a place as long as it operates. And so if you replace the batteries, then that's somehow a success. But she doesn't hear any of it. But what's really weird to me is how much she's punished for having just phased out of a boring conversation and a silly, inconsequential joke. I mean, she gets called on it, and it's weird how epic it becomes. Like the woman, I think it might be the wife of the husband, and I think she's probably a little slightly pissed. Like, my husband just told one of his off-color jokes, which is not particularly respectful of women, whatever. He's a client, he's rich, I don't care, he gets to do that. And I need some womanly solidarity here. We all need to chuckle over my husband's oafish joke. And she seems to even see it as her role to call out the wife, because really, if this is a client meeting, the relationship is between Carol's husband and this guy who tells the joke, and Greg, that's Carol's wife. It doesn't matter whether if he doesn't chuckle, I could see where it might be a little more of a big deal, because the guy's like, I'm giving you all my business, I expect you to laugh at my jokes. Fine. And it's not like she said, I find that joke offensive, which would have been okay with me if she did that, but I would see why they would be pushback. But boy, does she not get away with anything. All she does is kind of tune out, and they're like, oh, I don't, Carol doesn't seem to find your sense of humor very effective or something. And then she's horrified, and she goes, well, and she can't even say things like, sorry, I was thinking of something else. And she looks at her husband and mouths the word sorry. She seems to know, oh, like, man, I blew it. But she tunes out during sex itself. I mean, that scene we get right after she enters the garage with her husband is, on top of her, and he's trying to get toward getting to his climax. He's not thinking about her, whatsoever. And to some certain extent, that's okay with her, because she's not really participating. She's allowing the sex to happen as his wife. Just so, and that's so often her role is to, as the wife, allow things to happen. When he tries to hug her before he's leaving Renwood, and she said, I think it's your cologne. He's like, I'm not wearing cologne. He says, well, maybe it's your shirt. And then he's like, well, can I hug you? And she says, of course. But what do you mean, of course? How is he supposed to hug her? But it's interesting the way what attracts her to being environmentally ill in a way is it gives her a concrete reason that has nothing to do with her for why she's breaking down. And it doesn't challenge her symbolic order. Let me see if I can share the screen so I get some images going here. So I'm going to share a screen, and I want to do desktop 1, but why is it being weird? I don't know. Didn't expect that. The contents of your screen, even while using other apps. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Maybe. Sorry about this. I think maybe oh, I see. No, it's not going to work because, okay. Let's see. Let me get rid of that. Let me get a new window of Google so I can get this up there, because no, I don't want Safari to do this. Let's see if I can. University of Toronto Library. LIBIRY. And safe. So it should take me to the criterion, which is available online. And do that. And I'll get in on my, okay, I'll do that, do that. Okay, this is coming up slowly. Okay, so while we're waiting for this, let me talk about the. Wait, isn't it? Okay, hold on. And almost in. Okay, now it's coming up momentarily. Okay, let me pause and let's see if I can go back to, because now I'm here. Okay, share screen. Yeah, this is not. Oh, this is not happening. Maybe. No, that's not going to work. Okay, you know what? And rather than, so I'll probably, I'll have to figure this out. I might do a second tape where because I did figure it out for Broken Blossoms. In fact, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna conclude this tape as an introduction. I'm gonna try and come back on with an actual clip so I can talk about mirrors and the difference, the very, very different texture of safe. So let me end this for now, but I'm gonna list it as part 1 when I do it and come back, because I guess I've got to figure this stuff out. Okay, see you in a minute.